today's webinar, our Allyship workshop. Please share your name and affiliation in the chat box, and we'll go ahead and get started. So, first things first, let's go over logistics. This is a highly informal, interactive workshop, so less discussion with your peers, so please join in the conversation. We just ask that you click on participant or the raise your hand function before you actually unmute. And along that line, please keep your mic muted until we call upon you. At any time during this workshop, you can post comments, questions in the chat box. And then as a final reminder, we will be recording this event. Awesome. So, there we go. So today's agenda, we're going to go over 5 units of allyship. We're going to go over what is allyship. We're going to unpack our own privilege. We're going to figure out how powerful we are in situations. And then we're going to figure out and talk about different ways that we can be an ally in action. And then finally, we'll round that out with Allyship and Framework. We have a lot to go through today, so I'm going to try and get through all of it, but appreciate your guys' contribution to the conversation. Awesome. So, because this is more of a workshop about allyship, we ask that you please remove distractions. So go ahead and silence your cell phones, get comfortable, grab a glass of water, anything that can help comfort you during these conversations. Find a space where you can talk openly. I know there are a few of us who don't have access to mics or a video, but if you can engage in the chat, that'd be very great. And then also ground yourself. Sometimes conversations like this can be very hard. So if you can find a way to ground yourself during these conversations, and we're always here for you if you need anything. So we'll go ahead and start with introducing ourselves and why we're here. So hi, my name is Jessie Ribera. I am here to in this workshop today. Sorry, I'm having things. I'm here in running this workshop today because I am a cis woman. I am able-bodied, and it is critical to my own allyship. It is critical that my own allyship is informed by the groups that I aim to support. It is important for me to do this work because I don't want the burden of promoting equality to fall on those with less privilege, as it often does. So Jessica, if you want to take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Jessie. So Jessica Johnston, hopefully you've seen me before, but instead of talking about how I work for ESA today, I'm going to talk about my personal identity, which is I'm a cis white woman. I'm very able-bodied, but I'm also a part of the LGBTQIA plus community. And I'm here today because I recognize that I need allies to help me and my community have equal rights, but I also recognize and understand that I have my own privilege and that I can use my privilege to promote equality of those less likely to have a voice in the room. So with that being said, we're going to kind of jump right into it. Next slide, please. And we're going to ask ourselves, what is allyship? Okay, so I want to take 3 minutes, and I want everybody to kind of look inward and ask yourself these questions. What does allyship look like to you? What is it not? What do you think would make you a stronger ally? And maybe why, what is preventing this? And finally, what are you nervous or uncomfortable about? Maybe the topic makes you uncomfortable. So if you would like to share it in the chat, that would be wonderful, but you don't have to. But I would ask you to at least take 3 minutes to write down some responses to these questions. And you can maybe just do this on pen and paper as like a little aside. So it's 04 now. We'll wait until 07 and then we'll jump back into it. So I'm going to mute my mic. Just take 3 minutes to think about these questions. We have about 1 more minute. I see a couple of comments in the chat. That's great. Okay. So I see a couple comments, and I will let you all read those because we have a tight schedule today. So make sure you're opening the chat box and reading each other's comments, because I think that they're phenomenal and considerate. But we will move forward to the next slide. So here's the definition, right? Allyship is an active and consistent effort to use your privilege and power to support and advocate for people with less privilege. We're going to take a moment just to watch a quick YouTube video that better describes what allyship is. Jessie's going to load that up. It's only, I think, 4 minutes long, and then we'll have some discussion after the video. But feel free to keep commenting in the chat box if you would like.
You may have heard of allyship, but research shows that most of us don't really understand what allyship is. So let's start with the definition. Allyship is an active and consistent effort to use your privilege and power to support and advocate for people with less privilege. Let's unpack that. Our society is set up in ways that prioritizes some groups over others. For example, a restaurant might be easy to navigate for a person without a disability, but much harder for someone who uses a wheelchair. These patterns show up in our workplaces too. Studies show that leaders are more likely to mentor people who remind them of themselves. And since most leaders are white men, that means it's often easier for white men to find mentors.
Allyship involves understanding inequities like these and taking concrete steps to help level the playing field. This is a key point. To show up as allies, we have to take action. Sometimes taking action feels tricky or even uncomfortable, but not acting can be more harmful than we realize. It can send a signal that we're not aware of the injustices around us, or that we think they're okay, or even that we don't care. So if you're not sure what to do, ask yourself, is there an action I can take that is responsible, even if it's not perfect? If so, do that. Allyship isn't about getting any one action perfectly right. It's about acting consistently in ways that add up over time. This is another key point. Allyship is consistent. We might be moved to practice allyship toward a specific group when injustice is in the news, but to really make a difference, we need to commit to pushing for change over the long term. Now, let's look at the last piece of the definition. Allyship is about supporting and advocating for people with less privilege. That might mean speaking up when you see inequity, like pointing out that the women on your team are often interrupted in meetings. It could also mean working proactively to make things fairer. For example, you could research best practices for reducing bias in hiring and share what you learn with your team. As you're practicing allyship, it's important to stay focused on the people you're supporting and the impact you want to have.
Staying focused on impact isn't always easy. We sometimes end up focusing too much on how our actions make us look or feel. When this happens, we can slip into what's called a savior mentality. We might start pushing for solutions that sound right to us instead of listening to people with less privilege and following their lead. We can also end up practicing performative allyship, which means we're acting based on how we want to be perceived. For example, we might post on social media about the importance of supporting people of color, but not speak up when we hear racist comments in our daily lives. On the other hand, some of the most powerful allyship actions are the ones almost no one sees, like privately recommending a colleague with a traditionally marginalized identity for a promotion. Allyship isn't always easy or straightforward, and you won't get it right all the time, but it's so important that you continue to try because allyship really matters. By showing up as an ally, you can help people with traditionally marginalized identities feel included at work. Research also shows that allyship can have positive ripple effects. When employees see their colleagues acting as allies, they're more likely to step up too. This means that by practicing allyship, you can motivate others and shift your company's culture in a way that promotes equity. And when workplaces are more equitable, employees of all identities are happier and more committed to their jobs.
Okay, so I see some similarities from the comments in the chat versus the video, which is fantastic, which means that some of you, if not all of you, are already kind of aware of the importance of allyship. So Jessie's gonna bring up the slideshow and we are going to do a breakout room. So there's about 20 people. I think maybe we should do 5 rooms, Jessie. So there's about 4 people in each room. So I'll drop these questions into the broadcasted chat box so that you all can see them once you go into your breakout room. But we're going to take about 10 minutes. And during this 10 minutes, I want you to ask or answer these 2 questions. But I want you to keep in mind that while we're in the breakout rooms, we want to practice good listening skills and empathy during this discussion. We want to make sure we share the space so that everybody has an opportunity to talk. Commit to confidentiality. It's important for people to feel safe that they're sharing this information with you. Don't question other people's experiences. That's not what we're here for. We're just here to have a discussion and to really give each other grace during this time period, because these questions can be challenging for some more than others. Jessie, are you ready to open up the breakout rooms? So we're going to do it for 10 minutes. You're going to just jump in a room, and if you don't have a mic, I guess just be really active in your breakout rooms chat box. But those of you who are able to, maybe turn your cameras on and unmute your mics so that you have an opportunity to get to know the people that are in the program with you. And like I said, I'll drop these questions in the chat box for you all as well. So you should have the ability to hit the join button. Tanya, do you have a join button to join your, I'm not sure if I'm saying your name correctly, but you can go into the breakout room. Hannah, are you there? Okay. Oh, there's some faces. So somebody was talking to each other. Yay. Okay, everybody's rejoining the room. We have just a couple minutes. Does anybody want to share out the discussion in their room? You can chat, or we can do a little hand raise. How about reaction? Did everybody feel like they had a good discussion in the room? There's the reaction symbol, maybe a thumbs up if you had a good experience, or heart. That sounds great. I saw a hand raise for a second. Was that a hand raise as a reaction, or is it a hand raise because you want to talk and unmute? Okay, Jay, I see that you said we talked a lot about historical allyship practices in your park, especially regarding women in the park. All right. Laura, go ahead.
One thing that we talked about my group was in regards to the first question about, how did the video change your view on allyship? Something that really struck, I think all of us, was sort of the emphasis on consistency, that sometimes it feels like there's sort of this ebb and flow based on, and I forget who, someone in my group had like Kaylee had the best way of describing this, and I can't remember what exact words you used, but it was so perfect. Sort of like the social subconscious, and how that sort of ebbs and flows and how it's more mainstream versus not mainstream, but that really a key to allyship is the consistency and not letting that sort of fade away as that social subconscious sort of ebbs and flows.
Awesome. That sounds like a fantastic conversation in your group. And I also see Colton. Are you able to unmute your mic and say what you wrote, or you want me to read it? Okay, no mic. So you all talked about the disconnect between the parks you're at in terms of allyship and safety in the community near where you are stationed, which is also a great point. And Addison, yeah, we'll share the link to the video that you missed since you joined a little late, but let's keep moving forward in the conversation. Thanks you all for the comments.
Awesome. So unit 2 is unpacking privilege. In a minute, we're going to give you a poll, and you guys can kind of click through and see which statements you resonate and stuff. We're not going to share the poll. This is specifically for self-reflection. But to understand allyship, it is critical to understand our own privilege. Please keep in mind that when we're, discussing our privilege or exploring our privilege, privilege cannot be scored. It's not an assessment. It's not to quantify how privileged or not privileged you are. This is just an opportunity for you to explore moments that you go, I never thought of that before, or, I didn't have to consider that going to this place. It's just a way to explore our own empathy. And then finally, this list that we're about to give you is by no means exhaustive. Most likely we missed something somewhere. We probably did not capture your entire experience. It's just a point of reference. This does not mean that your experience doesn't matter. It's important and it does matter. So we'll go ahead and go over to the poll. A lot of interaction today, guys. So we'll go ahead and launch that poll. Please go ahead and answer it and just reflect as you do so.
We're not going to share the results of today's poll, just so everyone knows.
We'll go ahead and give another minute or two. During this time, just think about, note things that you might not have considered before, or things that stick out to you. All right, we'll go ahead and end the poll and move on to the next little bit, which is we'll give you about 3 minutes. We're going a little early, so maybe 3 to 5 minutes to reflect on some of these questions. What are some of the privileges you often take for granted? What might be different in your life without that privilege? What stood out to you about your own privilege? If you want to take a moment to just think about it or write it down. If you're feeling brave, you can put it in the chat as well. This is a safe space. And also, please keep in mind what Jessica said earlier, have empathy, have grace. We're all starting somewhere. So I'll go ahead and mute. I'll go ahead and read out some people's answers. If anyone wants to unmute and read their own answer out or anything as well. You know, Lori said she doesn't have to take for granted that she's always had food and a home when she was growing up. That's super important. Something that I didn't consider and wasn't even on the list. So thank you. Not being misgendered. Yeah, it's something that I think a lot of us take advantage for, or not take advantage of, take for granted. And it is a privilege not to have to think about that. Yeah, Rowan. You don't have to think about a lot of, or not having to think about a lot of things going places. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I hope that you all found something that made you do a double take and think, because I know I did. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next unit. Jessica.
Okay, so what have we done so far? We've talked about the allyship definition. We've talked about unpacking our privilege, but we need to move forward. And one of the ways that we could do that is by knowing that you are powerful and understanding and recognizing your power. One of those powers is affecting change within the community. Most of us probably understand that acting as an ally is important in making people with traditionally marginalized identities feel included and supported, but it's not just about our individual action. Research shows allies don't just influence one person at a time, which is kind of great if you think about it, but they really inspire others to act as change agents too, and creating a culture of acceptance and support. So simply put, allyship is a powerful force of good. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the types of power. I'm going to do them one at a time because I don't like a lot of graphics all at once and it overwhelms me. So first and foremost, these are powers in the workspace. That's what we're talking about. Everyday interactions. This category includes the day-to-day conversations that you have, meeting dynamics, water cooler talk. People of traditionally marginalized identities might feel like they have to contend with the other people talking, and also unintentionally or intentionally, for that matter, might experience forms of disrespect like microaggressions. Another power is the workplace norms and expectations. So this category includes everything from the way we set up our physical workspaces to the hours we expect our colleagues to work and be available, to the software and the tools that we use. The next power is hiring, which I think is kind of the obvious one probably, but it's explores the experiences while applying or interviewing for jobs. The next one is mentorship and sponsorship. And this category covers how we have access to mentors, sponsors, senior leaders, which has a long-lasting implications for how successful we are in our careers. And the final one is advancement and recognition. And this includes recognition for ideas or contributions or opportunities for advancement, like high-profile projects or promotions. Those are the 5 types of power dynamics that you kind of see in the workplace regularly. So now, knowing that we have these 5 and they're listed there below in the numbers, I want us to take 5 minutes to do some more self-reflection about how to discover your own power. What tasks do you work on or decisions do you make that you can influence these power dynamics in the workspace? And I think that some of you all might be like, but I'm just an intern. And I totally understand it. I get it completely. So I'll give you an example of a hiring power that a previous intern had at ESA. She was a ESA education intern. She was a volunteer undergrad, and she was only with us for 3 months. And in the 3 months, she helped us to identify that when we were asking for demographic information of race and ethnicity, that she didn't have a box to check. Well, she now has that box to check because she influenced us to make changes. So let's take 5 minutes, and maybe if anybody has an example, we don't have to go in order necessarily, you know, if one speaks to you more than the other, that's great. But if you want to either drop in the chat or maybe raise your hand, your participant hand, and you want to unmute your mic, we can have a vocalization from somebody other than me and Jessie for once. That's great. But are there any everyday interactions where you feel like you can be an ally and show change or workplace norms or expectations? Maybe you've already done it. You have a scenario where you can share with us. So I know it takes a moment to think of these things. So I'll give you a second. And then if we're having a hard time, maybe we can drop some examples in too. Mackenzie, go ahead, unmute your mic.
So this isn't as relevant to allyship, but just more workplace norms. A big conversation that I've been having is with the norms of like how many hours you're working a week and being set that I'm not working over 40 hours. And my supervisor is having a little bit of pushback saying like, this is like when we have to push at the end of the season, we're trying to get things done. And talking to my peers and just saying that me pushing back that I'm not willing to work over that 40 hours since we're on a stipend is like creating that culture that we're not going to like overwork ourselves. So they were very appreciative of like me pushing back, even though like I'm at the forefront of it. So just kind of like creating that expectation, that way it's easier for them if they have to stand up for themselves to not work over 40 hours. So that's just something that was like relevant and at the top of my head.
That's a perfect example. You know, changing the mindset of the norms, right? Just because it was that way always before doesn't mean that it has to continue to always be that way. You know, maybe it had to do originally with the fact that people were poorly managing their time, you know, and that's the reason why all the hours got pushed into a small amount of time. But that doesn't mean that it has to be the way it always is. Does anybody else have an example that they want to share? Addison, I know you don't have a mic, so I'll read out what you said. I think at a higher level than an intern actively seeking someone to mentor who doesn't share a ton of similarities with you is a way to break the mold a bit. Like the video said, we tend to pick people similar to ourselves, so doing the opposite of the norm. Well, very well written. Yes, absolutely. Jessie's saying planning social events for coworkers, suggesting places that are accessible and safe to all. Laura, I see your hand is raised. You want to unmute?
Sure. I was just going to say that one thing I've tried to do, so like as a grad student, I've worked with several undergraduate students. And so one thing I learned, I had a student like a few years ago ask me to write a recommendation for them, like a letter, just a really short paragraph. And so I started reading up on all of the sort of like internal biases that we have. And so this undergrad student was female. And so I had read up that oftentimes, regardless of if you have, you know, a female or a male mentor, oftentimes for female mentees, you'll use sort of these gendered and biased terms that are like are valued less sort of in like the normal like social hierarchy. And so I try to be, whenever I'm writing letters for students, I try to be very cognizant of my own biases, that I might try to use certain words or terms that I think are really favorable, but ultimately other people sort of within our normal social structure may value them less. And so I might be accidentally making someone who is, you know, this amazing person and student and like researcher be less likely to get a position because of my own biases and how I'm like using terms and letters or references. And so I try to do that, like in terms of the advancement recognition, I try to make sure that I'm not accidentally putting my own biases onto that and helping all of the students who work for me, like, you know, advance.
Right, exactly. Because what you think is one thing can be easily misread or interpreted differently, and may place less value on the individual that you're actually trying to help, right? Megan, you have a comment, no mic though. So, oh, hold on, chat's bouncing. This is good though, this is good. everyday interaction, you always try to refer to people as they until I know their pronouns. I also like using terms like partner or spouse, especially to not make assumptions. Yeah, that's seemingly becoming more normalized, which I love. Although it's a little confusing for me because being part of the LGBTQIA community, I was like, wait, partner is my word, but no, it's totally fine. And I appreciate that you're using that. Isabel, I'm not totally sure what category this falls into, but I work with community a lot in my position. I think trying to emphasize that you don't have to identify a specific way to work at the park. In my case, this is something I especially care about because my project is to connect to astronomy, which is a field still dominated by white men. Yes, absolutely. Ecology is very much shifted to white women, but astronomy is still very much white men. And I can resonate with that completely. And Addison, working on a project that is very visual heavy, so making it a point not to make the alt text an afterthought, but a real piece that someone visually impaired could experience the piece fully. And you've got a Washington Post article there. So everyone check that out because my fellows have presentations coming up. So we also want to have accessible presentations. These are all wonderful comments. And the idea here is just really to understand where there are opportunities to speak up, even in a position that is as temporary as you all are experiencing with the National Park Service. You can still make changes. You can still leave thoughts for your mentors and the personnel that you interact with. Okay, that's it. Jessie, you're up.
All right, those are great comments, everyone. On to Unit 4, and we'll try and do this as quickly and also as thoroughly as we can. So we're going to talk about different ways you can be an ally in action. We're going to watch a quick 4-minute video. So actually, I have to double check that I'm sharing audio. Awesome. All right.
Let's start looking at some specific ways you can show up as an ally in your workplace. As you think about the actions you might take, it's helpful to keep your privilege and positional power in mind. When you recognize your privilege, you can better see the barriers that people with less privilege face and address them as you take action. And when you reflect on your positional power, you'll begin to see where you are best positioned to drive change. Your positional power is based on your role and level. We all have positional power. In fact, we often have more than we realize. So how can you start taking action? It's helpful to think about allyship actions in 3 categories: individual, interpersonal, and structural. Individual actions are the steps you take to educate yourself, model good behavior, or change your mindset. There are many different types of individual actions. They often happen behind the scenes, but they're still really important. For example, learning about others' experiences is an individual action, and it's also a critical step towards showing up as an ally with empathy and understanding. You can also take individual actions to make your work more inclusive. This might look like using gender-neutral language in written materials, or making sure people of all races and abilities are represented in imagery. Again, these are just a few of many possible individual actions. You'll have a chance to explore others in the next part of this workshop.
Interpersonal actions involve supporting others and advocating for equity in your day-to-day interactions. Speak up when you notice inequity. For example, by correcting a colleague who assumes a new hire is straight or cisgender is an interpersonal action. So is mentoring a colleague with a traditionally marginalized identity or making sure they get credit for their accomplishments and ideas. Affirming someone's experience of inequity can also be a powerful interpersonal action. For example, letting a colleague know you're thinking of them when violence or hatred against their community is in the news. As you practice interpersonal allyship actions, remember that no 2 people or situations are the same. People with similar identities can have very different experiences, needs, and expectations. It's always important to think about the individual you're supporting, the relationship you have with them, and the specific barriers they're facing.
Finally, Structural actions involve pushing for more equitable norms, policies, and systems. For example, advocating for objective criteria in hiring and promotions is a structural action. Another example is encouraging your company to use software and other tools that are accessible to people with disabilities. Before you push for structural change, take some time to learn about the solutions that people with traditionally marginalized identities are already working on. Then be intentional about aligning your work with theirs. Whether your actions are individual, interpersonal, or structural, remember that allyship is an ongoing practice. There's no finish line because there is always more we can do to promote equity.
Awesome. So we learned about the 3 different types of allyship that you can categorize. Individual, so taking the moment to educate ourselves, model good behavior. That's also, empowering others, and also changing our mindset. Interpersonal, being there for other people, actions to support. And then finally, structural. So pushing for structural change within norms, policies, and the system. So with that, you'll go into our next little bit. We're going to have another breakout room. We're kind of pushed for time, so let's do like 8-ish minutes and talk about, you don't have to do one, but you can do an individual, interpersonal, or structural action. And you can discuss what would it look like for you to practice that action in your role at your park? Whom would you talk to? What would you do? Or how would you get it started? What inequity would you like to address? What group would it advance or support? What challenges might you face? How might you individually or with others in your group start to work through those? So we'll go ahead and put you into breakout groups really fast. We'll go ahead and do the same ones you were in before. And Jessie, if you could drop that in the chat and broadcast it again. Discuss what we talked about during the breakout groups. I'm trying to be mindful of your guys' time. We only have 2 more slides left. So if anyone wants to unmute and talk about what they talked about or in their breakout room, or if they want to drop it in the chat, be nice. Anyone want to start?
I could always just call on people. Somebody new. I want to hear somebody new. I know people are typing. Thank you.
I have an example that I just thought of that wasn't in our group chat, but it's more specific to our department for my PhD program. So there was an end of the year survey that asked, I think it was specifically geared towards DEI initiatives. And I kind of went off on a tangent like I'm doing now. And I essentially having conversations with other students, especially some that are mothers or fathers or varying levels of like income level, that some of the structural inequities in place, like too many frequent classes or the structure of work is not well suited for like everybody and their needs. And so that was just something that I talked about, like having a more flexible program in general to meet the needs of all students is something that, and this may or may not be relevant, but it's just something that I was trying to take action on through, like, it was just like a end of the year like survey poll for my college.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea to get reference of what people's needs are. I think oftentimes mothers and fathers in the workplace are overlooked because they can't do the same as their childless counterparts. It's important to have equity in the workplace for them as well. Awesome. We got a comment from Jay. We talked mostly about ways we can make our produced content accessible for everyone, because the actions we take for that accessibility require so much less effort than the effort it would take for those who require those measures to access the information or content, and how we continue to keep that in mind in everything we do. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, Megan says, with large seasonal staff, it feels like NPS struggles to continue to be flexible to make sure they can meet the needs for employees. Agreed. All right. Any other comments or things? All right, we'll move on to the next part, which is the Allyship Framework. And this is just going to be really quick. So throughout this workshop, we've explored the different elements of the framework. As we now know, there are many ways to practice allyship depending on what privileges you have to leverage and the problems and inequities that are, what power and opportunities you have, and what actions you want to take. So this is the active allyship framework. You just learned it. First, understanding your own privilege, understanding where your own positional power is within the workplace, considering actions to take, and also identifying inequalities at work. This active allyship framework is meant to help you think and connect the dots between these pieces. And also, this framework is not linear, so you don't have to start one place or the other. And you don't actually have to run it formally through before acting as an ally, but it is a helpful tool for planning and reflecting on your allyship journey. So I hope that that was helpful for you and that you enjoyed this webinar. Jessica?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, allyship is continuous, right? So this is just a small snapshot. We could talk about this for days and weeks, but we don't have that much time. So I hope you carry the conversation on with your mentors or in your parks to advance and make changes for those who don't have a voice. That being said, our next webinar next week, Thursday, 3 o'clock Eastern time, on presenting research at a scientific conference. So if you're having an opportunity to go to a scientific conference, that will help you kind of set the stage for presenting. And that's it. That's what we are here for. If the fellows want to hang back and talk to me or ask me questions about the ESA conference coming up, you're welcome to do so. But otherwise, I hope you all are treating each other well and having a great summer and experiencing the beautifulness that is the national parks. So that's all for now. Bye, y'all. Thanks for coming.
Thanks all.